Thank you. So, hi, for anyone who wasn't here 20 minutes ago. My name's Nick. I am a virtual CISO. So I work now primarily with smaller businesses who don't have the amount of work or the money to hire someone full-time, so I advise them on an interim basis. And I wanted to do a talk about, ask the question actually, why breaches happen. Now, the first thing is there's many different types of breaches. In this, I'm going to focus on what we would think of as cyber attacks. So not breaches from lost devices, not breaches from, privacy breaches where people are seeing inappropriate data. I'm talking more, what are the cyber attacks that make the news? How and why did they happen? So, okay, firstly, a couple of points. Is actually virtual CISO, I think, yes. It's still a relatively new thing, but the idea is more and more small businesses need security help. They need to know what level is appropriate for them. And traditionally, the security industry has been quite bad at telling people what level of security is appropriate. It's always, well, you can do more, you can do more, you can do more. Part of the reason I'm doing the job that I did is in my last job, I actually kind of ran out of things to do when I was in an in-house role. And it's not something you normally expect to happen in a security side. You never really hear about security people saying they ran out of things to do. But the idea is as a business, we had done everything that we wanted to do. The risk that they were taking was a risk they were happy to take. And so it meant that actually it was a case of you could then just go in and keep things working and you review that. And actually, the more I was doing that, the more I realized that's a model that smaller businesses need. So this is what we're going to look at today. It's kind of why are breaches happening. We're going to look at what does security look like for a small business and how to make sure that when you think about security, you don't just think in terms of products and vendors. So ultimately, what is it that I do? I think that whether you're a virtual CISO or an in-house CISO, your real job is to understand and communicate risk. Right? There is a certain amount of risk that the business is taking around cyber security, and that needs to be balanced against other business objectives. There are going to be many other people in a company advocating for other positions. You are the person who needs to advocate for why that there is a certain amount of risk being taken and come up with, well, how are we going to reduce this risk? It's no good just to be able to say, this is a very risky thing that we're doing, if you then can't say, and here's how we could fix it. And also that needs to be multiple strategies. It can't just be a one-way, my way or the highway. It needs to be, here are different options that reduce your risk in different amounts that cost different amounts of money to implement. So, if we look at what the challenges are in a small business, number one that keeps coming out, I have no budget. I have no money, I can't therefore do anything on security. I have very limited resources. I have a very small IT estate, a very small team. So again, limited resources, limited on what I can do, what I can afford. Potentially the IT team is outsourced. That's another one that you see quite a lot. I have no in-house security team. So again, what can I do on security? We'll come back to those in a second and have a look at them, but this is what I keep hearing. This is the prevailing wind of cyber reporting. Breaches are inevitable, you can't stop them, which is never said, but sort of leads on to, so why try? Breaches are inevitable. If someone wants to get in, they'll get in. What's the other one that you hear? Oh, the attackers only have to be right once, the defenders have to be right every time. This is all pretty much crap. So I think what I would say is the elephant in the room is that the thing that no one talks about, the majority of these breaches are actually easily avoidable. The stuff that you hear about, the stuff that happens, the stuff that makes the papers, it didn't need to happen, right? We are not, even when you get to the point where there was a story a few years ago where Russia hacked the Ukrainian power grid and turned off some Ukrainian, not power plants, but like power relays. And everyone freaked out because it was like, oh my God. Yeah, it's like, turns out if you manage your power grid with Windows XP desktops connected directly to the internet, someone can probably hack those and turn them off. That's not really that sophisticated an attack. The only reason it took this long was took someone looking for them. Once they were found, that was it. Right? The majority of this stuff exploits very, very simple stuff. I can think of a handful of things that I would think of as targeted and sophisticated, and they all fall under the nation state banner. Everything else, and even the nation states, will start with simple techniques. If they can use simple techniques, they'll start with those. They will then move to the more sophisticated stuff, but yeah, okay, so, sorry, move the slides around a little bit. So why are these happening? What are the mistakes that people are making? And number one is over-reliance on technology or third parties to solve the problem. They are, too often you see a firm's approach to security is, here is a risk, that's my bad. Here is a risk, we don't know how to fix it, so we're just going to bring in someone else, and we want them to outsource it. We want to shift this risk onto someone else's books. That could be a few different ways. That could be, I'm just going to check this works, yeah. I'm going to buy a product, because that product tells me that they stop breaches. And so therefore, all I need to do is buy that product. It might be they sign a contract with a security company who come in and they say, we're going to monitor your network for security breaches. And again, at that point, the company, basically, they stop paying attention to it. The other big one that I see is this idea of perimeter mindset or defense in depth. A lot of companies preach this, but they don't actually do it. So what we mean by defense in depth is attacks are not, like most of the cyber attacks that you hear about, they're not single events. They're chains, they're sequence of events. Right? Think about how, maybe not the nicest analogy, but I got into watching air crash investigation, like the whole series, and you learn that like in almost every case of a plane crashing, it wasn't one thing. Like planes are designed to be resilient. It was that these 10 things all went wrong in the exact same order in order for that plane to crash. This is the same. It's the idea of a cyber attack is a sequence of events. And people don't plan for the sequence. They plan for the first event. And when the first part of that chain happens, their whole security strategy fails, and the rest can go on without being in any way protected. And by number three, by far and away the biggest one is poor prioritization and avoiding hard decisions. Right? If you have essentially a network full of very old legacy technology, you cannot really keep that secure. You can mitigate that to some extent for some period of time, but you are essentially triaging it, patching over, right? At some point, you need to make the hard decision and accept that some of these things need to be upgraded. You need to move off of some of these old systems. You need to make those decisions. Too often, what you see is, especially with legacy technology, what you get is you get to the point where it becomes such a big problem, whoever is responsible for fixing it has a choice. They can kick off a huge technology upgrade project, which if it goes wrong, that's their job, they're gone. If it goes right, no one's really going to thank them. So what do they all do? They just go, well, I'll just patch over it for the next 2 years, it'll become someone else's problem. And so this is how you just get these things build up and never get solved. That is obviously one of the biggest issues there. It's, at some point, you need to make those hard decisions. Now, let's see if this still works. Ah, yes. Okay, so one of the biggest threats over the last 12 months, crypto miners. Right? What this means is it's software that lands on your system and starts to mine cryptocurrency. Right? But mining cryptocurrency is, has been at various points, profitable to whatever level the cryptocurrency is worth. But mining it off one machine is only marginally profitable. What you will now start to see is they propagate around your entire network and mine across as many computers as they can. And this worm-like, if you take software on one machine and replicate it to lots of other machines, that's what we consider like worm-like. So it's a very old sort of like computer virus thing that happened in like 80s and 90s. Worms were very popular. They stopped being popular, and then all of a sudden it's come back. And there's really like two main methods. One is called Eternal Blue. Eternal Blue you may have heard of because it was the same thing that was behind WannaCry last year. It's still being used today to propagate. The other one is something called Mimikatz. Mimikatz is a tool that's been around for years. It allows you to extract passwords from Windows computers. And it allows you to get those passwords in clear text. What I mean is, if I have the permissions to run this tool, I will see your password. And it will just present me back, not an encrypted version, but the actual version. I then pair that with something called PowerShell, which is basically a Windows scripting language, and I can use your password on any computer in your network, subject to the right controls. The point is, pretty much all of these crypto miners and other pieces of malware use one of those two things. So you're sitting there going, well, if we know that there's two main causes, can we not prevent those? Yes, we can, but we seem to not to do that. So I'm not going to read all of this out, but basically WannaCry, this was, I want to say, was it 2016? 2017? I can't even remember, it was so long ago. But no initial delivery mechanism has ever been found. It was never sent via email. This was not an email attachment. You had to have a computer facing the internet exposing a critical Windows service that you had not patched for 3 months. Right? That's bad. Let's just get this straight. That should not happen. If you have stuff internally that hasn't been patched, 3 months is not great, but externally, facing the internet, that's terrible. But that's what you needed for this thing to get in. Once it was in, it would spread to any other computer it could, and it would spread to any third parties that you had those sorts of connections to as well, right? But patching would have completely mitigated this extent. External patching, just patching the things that you have that face the internet, would have stopped this ever getting into your network. So anyone that got hit by WannaCry had not patched internet-facing systems for a critical vulnerability for 3 months. That's what we're talking about. NotPetya was a similar one, but this one did get delivered initially via a more technical attack. So WannaCry was, I believe, North Korea, NotPetya was Russia. So again, people put these down as nation state, yes, but the techniques behind them were very basic. Now, NotPetya had a much more advanced attack method. So what Russia did was they wanted to target Ukraine, and a lot of businesses in Ukraine used a particular piece of tax software. So they hacked the maker of the tax software and hid their attack in an update for that tax software. So when all these businesses in the Ukraine downloaded the latest version of this tax program, it downloaded their attack. Right? That, I will grant you, is a very hard attack method to stop. However, let's look at Maersk. Maersk got taken down by this. I think it was 45,000 desktops and 5,000 servers in 2 hours. How does one infected machine in the Ukraine spread to 50,000 machines in 2 hours? Well, it's either SMB or credential theft. So either they had no internal patching, and so all of their machines were just vulnerable, or somewhere in the Ukraine, there was an account or a person that was permissioned on every single computer across Maersk, or at least to enough that when you hop, okay, this computer is permissioned to these, and on those you get an account that's permissioned to the next set, and it just hops out. But it did it in 2 hours. So by the time you're actually responding to this attack, it's too late. But again, it's very simple techniques. And then finally, I don't think they're here today, but anyway, Deloitte had a potential, because when I was writing this a while back, it hadn't actually been confirmed. Data theft from Office 365, where they hadn't put privileged multi-factor on their admin account. And so their admin account got hacked because the password got found out. That's kind of a cyber attack, but again, it's guessing a password. Like, here is all of our sensitive data, and if you get hold of this password, you can get to it. That's what this boils down to. And not only is here's all our sensitive data, here's all our sensitive data, and the one account that you need to get access to anything, or to change any permission, or to add any user, is the one that we hadn't protected. So, okay. Again, pretty basic. So what do you need to do to actually fix this? Well, it's about prioritization. In a lot of these cases, what you're seeing is companies trying to do everything and then missing critical controls. There are two lists that I quite like. There's the CIS critical security controls. It used to be called the SANS Top 20. That's not bad. My favorite by far is an Australian one. It's called the Top 35, but actually they have a subset, which is called the Essential 8. Those 8 things, if you're doing nothing else, those 8 things will keep you safe from a cyber attack. Right? Interestingly, antivirus not in that list. So firewall's not really in that list, right? Now, again, if you speak to most people, what do I need to do on security? Firewalls and antivirus is the majority of what you still get as being the top 2 things. They're not in those top 8. So what are they? I'm not going to go through all these in bulk, but basically you've got like 3 key controls here. These are to try to stop malware getting into and running on your system, right? So you've got stuff like patching, but it's not just patching Windows, it's patching the programs, the software that you run. That's what people attack. They don't necessarily attack Windows for the start. They might attack Office, they might attack Chrome, they might attack Adobe browser, like Adobe PDF Reader. Stuff like application hardening is going in and just turning off things that you don't need. So this is a lot of functionality within browsers and functionality within Office, so like macros and things like that. And that sort of goes into application whitelisting. And again, this is more complicated, I will grant you, but there is some simple steps you can take on application whitelisting. And the key thing is, there is stuff built into Windows that does all of this for free. You don't actually have to buy any product to do any of these things, right? Oh yeah, disable macros. The next set of controls are to say, okay, someone's got access, but how do we stop it becoming a really big breach? And you've got like a few things here. So the first thing is multi-factor authentication. So just because I've managed to get a password shouldn't mean I can then like log straight into your Office 365, or I shouldn't be able to log straight into your Salesforce. Operating system patching is, again, if I've hacked one computer, I shouldn't be able to then necessarily spread to every other computer on your network. And finally, the last one is restricting privileged accounts. If you're running as an administrator and I hack you, I instantly get administrator rights, which basically makes my job 100 times easier. So if you are running as administrator and I hack you, I have the immediate ability pretty much to then start dumping your passwords, which means I can just then start logging in as any user. So that's the key thing here, is that restricting those privileged accounts. And it does disrupt some people in your business. For many people, they're not going to notice. If you've got developers, this sort of restricted access can be more of a problem, and that's where you have to manage it more closely. But for like 80-90% of your business, you can take away their admin rights and they shouldn't know. And then finally, the last bit is, okay, so we've had a cyber incident. What can you do to actually allow for recovery? The key thing here is backups, right? Ransomware continues to be a problem, not because ransomware gets in, but because people don't have backups. Your strategy to ransomware shouldn't be spend thousands upon thousands upon thousands on anti-ransomware products. It should be, well, step one is backup data that ransomware could target. Because if you have a ransomware incident, delete the encrypted data, restore from a backup, and you're back up and running, right? Backups are key. Testing backups are key. Right? Again, you've got a whole industry that is now anti-ransomware being set up. Backups are the way to solve this problem. So, if we come back to our list of what are the challenges, okay, no budget. Most of what we've talked about there are free controls. I've got limited resources, fine, prioritize, aggressively prioritize. Don't try to do everything. Pick things that you're going to do and implement those things to a high standard. If you've got a small IT estate, a small IT team, cloud adoption, right? A lot of those basic controls are built into, like stuff like patching can be built into SaaS products for you, right? So cloud adoption. Now, cloud adoption doesn't get rid of all your problems, but it gets rid of some of them, and it can allow you to focus on what are the problems that are left for you to manage. So the big one here being user accounts, right? So I work with a lot of startups that may have 20 or 30 people. They may each have 20 cloud accounts, and you explain to them, you're managing 600 accounts. And they never have really done that maths to think about it, but you're like, that's your problem with cloud. It's not the actual infrastructure, it's not the SaaS platform, it's your accounts that are at risk. It's one person using the same password across all 20 of those services. Outsourced IT, actually, again, this is not a bad thing. You can embed controls in, they can build those things in, and your staff just get used to them. Also, there's no reason for them to have admin, because you don't have admins in your office, so that's quite good. No in-house security team, use third parties when necessary. Not everyone needs security monitoring. If you've embedded these controls to a high level, your environment's already fairly secure. You don't necessarily need to go to the extent of monitoring. If you do, there are starting to become third parties that are actually attractively priced for small businesses. So I think the key things here are if you're a small company, what do you want? You want a defined security strategy and accepted risk levels. How much risk are we willing to take? Who are we trying to keep out? Is it e-crime? Is it nation states? Is it targeted attacks? Is it the stuff that's hitting everyone on the internet? You know, at a base level, the attacks that hit everyone is where you want to be protecting. You have to keep that stuff out, and that's relatively simple. Build on top of that if you are more at risk. Basic controls with your IT. So you make sure that your IT provider, whether that's in-house or external, automated updates or managed updates, privilege management, not everyone running as administrator, basic application hardening, all in place. Multi-factor on the cloud. And then password vaults or some sort of centralized identity management. So single sign-on is a great thing here. So single sign-on so that you don't have to manage all of those accounts per person. And optionally outsource SecOps, again, depends on your business. Basically, the idea here was this is a little bit complicated to explain, but the idea was you move around this diagram. You don't just implement controls and throw a bunch of money at it. Start with implementing security controls without spending money. Like, if the bar on the left is how much money you're spending, don't start spending money until you've done the basic stuff that's free. Then, once you've done the basic stuff, then you can start spending money on security operations, on security staff, etc. But you start with the basic controls that are free. I can skip through this bit. The key thing being, this stuff is actually relatively simple for small businesses. It gets more complicated the larger you get. So if you're sitting here going, well, my business is less than 500 people, those are actually fairly easy implementable controls. Scaling is what causes this to be hard. Scaling is where you get holes in those basic controls. Those holes need security budget to patch over. The other thing is, a lot of these things are thought of as binary, and they're not. Like, application whitelisting isn't on or off. It can be implemented in different ways at different levels. So think of all of these as sliding scales. So even just doing them a little bit and then just slowly nudging them up over time is better results than aiming for a complete 0 straight to 10. Think of them as like maturity levels that you can sort of build up as you get comfortable with them. This is just to say that, yeah, like, if you're sitting there on thousands of credit card data, millions of credit card records, if you're sitting there with potential for nation state attacks, the basic controls are still important, but they're not going to be far enough. That's not the majority of small businesses. But even if you're in that zone, these are what you still need to slow them down. Right? Too many times China break into a big company and they can move through that company and get out the other side before anyone even realized there's an attack in progress, because basic controls aren't in place to slow them down. Oh, I thought there was a question slide at the end. But yes, so the idea being is that this mostly doesn't apply to small businesses, but depends on where you're at. But for most small businesses, prioritize, focus on the key controls. Those lists are out there, they're free, and they are actually effective. For all of those attacks that we saw earlier, the WannaCries, the NotPetya, all of those sorts of things, basic controls around patching and privilege management would have nullified them. You know, there should be no need for those things to have gotten as bad as they did. The reason they got that bad was because Maersk are trying to manage 50,000 devices. If you're not managing 50,000 devices, these become an infinitely more solvable problem without having to spend huge amounts of money. And so I think that is the end. So thank you. If there's any questions.